Hi, I'm Kate Ott, Associate Professor of Christian Social Ethics at the Theological School. This short video is in the section Community Building and Cultural Diversity within our module that's presenting you with significant amount of research related to online pedagogies. One of the assumptions about online learning is that it will not be able to build community for people because folks won't be in person with one another, and that it often reiterates dominant white ableist classist kind of frameworks within education. And that can be true, but the opposite can also be true if we engage with pedagogies that increase student engagement and the relevance of course and course content to students' lives. So those are the two primary factors in community building and cultural diversity in online learning. It's not difficult work in the sense of knowing what we need to do, but it is difficult in how we actually put a course together and the effort that an instructor makes to engage the students. I was able to attend online, of course, the Ideate 2020 Online Consortium Conference. And I'd like to share with you some direct research that was recently conducted as two universities switched from primarily on-campus learning to online learning, both synchronous and asynchronous, during their response to the COVID pandemic in this spring 2020 semester. So the presentation that I attended was called Humanizing the Online Learning Experience Through Inclusivity. It was conducted by two scholars, by Stephanie Ham, who is the Chief Diversity Officer at Abilene Christian University, and her partner, Scott Ham, who is Assistant Professor of Education and Director of Online Education at Hardin-Simmons University. Both of them study online learning, but also care deeply about inclusivity, both for students of color as well as international students. And they were concerned that when their universities switched to synchronous and asynchronous learning, that students of color and international students in particular would have negative experiences, would have decreased engagement in their classrooms. And so what they wanted to do at the end of the semester, or close to the end of the semester, was to study and ask those students what made a difference for them as they understood culturally competent or inclusive pedagogy in the courses in which they participated. So what Scott and Stephanie Ham found was what the literature reiterates, which is inclusive pedagogy starts with very simple, perhaps we might say, but can often be difficult for some folks to include in their classes, begins with a diversity of texts, authors, and resources in a classroom. So remember, the primary research showed that students' understanding or feeling of their course as building community and being culturally competent, of including diversity and welcoming that diversity, was marked by students' understanding and feeling of relevance for the course material for their own experiences and lives. What increased that relevance of course content was, first, the kinds of resources available to students. So, who were the authors? Are the authors of certain texts and resources in the class, do they represent the same kind of diversity that the student body does in that classroom? If not, if for some reason, which I highly doubt, the research in any field cannot have that sort of inclusive diversity, then did instructors go the next step? Were there ways in which the students could take resources and materials and apply them to sort of relevance-based engagement in the student's own context? So the first was diverse resources. The second was, were there opportunities for students to engage the material in a relevance-based way for the student's own specific context? And that obviously means creating different opportunities for conversation, for forum, for assignments, where students get to craft those in a way that are relevant to their context. The next was forms of online pedagogies that invite a broader community. So were there other experts that were invited into the classroom? Perhaps literally in a synchronous fashion, you invited colleagues in, and those colleagues represented a variety of diversities in terms of gender, race, ability, disciplinary diversity, and maybe even methodological approach diversity. So you could invite experts in that way synchronously, but they also found asynchronously, assigning perhaps videos that are already out there or resources that students could go and engage from a different cultural context also helped in terms of bringing other expertise in that also created and included a wide variety of diversity. Another aspect that they found helped, that the students reported on, was when students themselves were asked to bring their own diversity to class. And that could be content specific, or it could be about increasing engagement of sort of interpersonal connection among students. So perhaps it's just a beginning of the class ritual where students were allowed to post their favorite song or talk about their favorite foods, ways that they could learn about each other and each other's differences and see that the instructor was welcoming that kind of difference and diversity and wanted to know about the students' backgrounds. So again, that can be directly relevant to content, which increases the whole relevance of the course, or it can simply be about community building among the learners so that they have a better sense of who they are, who each other is, and who you are and how you're welcoming that as an instructor. Now, all of those things can be done, and that was the first step towards it creating community building opportunities, but also ones that are that exhibit inclusive pedagogy and welcome various diversities, given this research that Scott Ham and Stephanie Ham have conducted. However, or in addition, what they also found was that much of that could be erased or could be amplified by the instructor's presence. And that presence did not have to be synchronous, though it could. When students in this study suggested that the role of the professor was the most important, or sort of the last bit that really made the class an inclusive experience for students of color and international students, a few of the things they were referencing was the professor's attention to how often different folks contributed to class discussion. Was it dominated by certain student groups? Was it dominated by white students? Was it dominated by US-based conversation? How did the instructor themselves intervene in a way that created more inclusivity in terms of conversation and contribution in the class? So that can clearly happen in synchronous formats on Zoom, but it can also happen in asynchronous formats. You know, are certain people dominating forums? In what ways are the forums used? Are different folks picked in a rotating manner as leaders on the forum so that their opinions and their engagement of certain contexts is seen as either equal to or benefiting the entire course? So those were a few of the direct engagements that students noted in this study that increased the ways in which they both felt the instructor took charge in the sense of creating an inclusive classroom space, but also the ways in which students themselves were asked to participate and their own, again, that reflection, that course relevance to their own context, bringing their context with them in their learning experience, created a course that contributed to both community building, but also cultural diversity through inclusive pedagogy. So that's a very quick and rough overview of this particular study and a few of the examples that were given in the presentation by both Stephanie and Scott Ham on, I love the title of their workshop, on humanizing the online experience through inclusivity, and ways in which we perhaps already offline create our courses with diverse resources, diverse learning opportunities, context-based application of the material, but also think about the ways in which we create spaces and use instructional technologies to diversify participation, engagement, and contribution from all of our students in our learning environments. So I hope you will take some time to read the other resources that are available to you in this section. They provide other examples and a sort of background pedagogical research on how to both build community and engage cultural diversity among students of color as well as international students in online learning.